Good morning, and welcome to the Synapse We podcast, networking creative entrepreneurship and beyond. On the Synapse We podcast, we explore innovation by conversing with policymakers, artists, technology experts, renewable and climate change specialists, and beyond on the synergies between the creative industries and a range of sectors. I'm your host, Dr. Marielle Barrow, and my personal journey as a painter, dancer, and academic has brought me into contact with a lot of creative entrepreneurs, helping to facilitate their journeys. I believe that the joy and learning that I have been privileged to experience on this journey is worth sharing. And so today, this podcast is just about that. It's about sharing experiences. It is about sharing with other creative entrepreneurs and learning from them. Today, we are really, really privileged to have with us Miss Maria O'Brien. Maria, welcome to the Synapse We podcast. It is such a pleasure to have you today.
I am super excited to be here, Marielle. As you know, I think really looking forward to any discussion with you about anything, but in particular, what we're talking about today excites me a lot. Yeah.
So Maria is an artist, but Maria is also a lot of other things. And so I just want to tell you a little bit more about her, a little more formally. Maria is a lifelong volunteer, self-proclaimed, and she's a Google Women Tech Makers Ambassador for Trinidad and Tobago, a GDG community organizer, and a United Nations civil society partner. She has a broad background in digital design and digital solutions consultancy, gathered over 15 years of practice. She currently serves as the lead digital designer at the Office of the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, co-director of the MindWise Project, a mental health nonprofit focused on local and regional mental health, Tech for Good Solutions, and is the founder and chief innovation officer of Design Change, a social change design firm selectively disrupting systems through targeted social innovation and sustainable development projects. This is a woman after my own heart. When Maria and I connected, I was just so overjoyed, so overwhelmed. It was one of those kind of soul connections. So really welcome to Synapse We podcast, Maria.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
So I just wanted to start with, just tell us a little bit about your journey as an artist, as a visual artist, as someone who draws beautifully and who is connecting with audiences in this way at this moment.
So, it's one of those things, and I'm not sure if every artist has this, but, your journey as an artist starts really young. So I think I've been drawing when I was probably since I'm 2 years old. 2 years old, I would draw because I wasn't really interested in toys or Barbies. I did like Lego. Lego was cool, but my mom wouldn't bring me toys. She would bring me reams of paper, and I would draw instead of doing anything else. I didn't have brothers and sisters to play with because I'm the lanyap. For those of you who are tuning in from other countries, a lanyap is like a last lap child, and mostly an accident child. Like we were not
no
planned.
Accident.
we were not planned. We weren't planned. So I'm the lanyap by 10 years, which is a lot.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So when people play with their brothers and sisters, I didn't really have that. My brothers and sisters were like in their adult journeys while I was discovering my love for art. And my mother was my biggest fan. She collected everything I ever drew, even like, the beginnings of something. She put them all in these big folders. So I had a lot of support as a I guess a budding artist, really young. I think it's really important to all the parents out there. If you have a kid who has an inclination towards drawing or painting or anything like that, support them, because you just never know where that talent what it can become and how much fulfillment it gives them.
It's a coping mechanism in so many ways, right?
Oh my God, yes. And I mean, I grew up in a violent home. So maybe there's a connection there. Now that you mention it, there's probably a connection between how drawing helped me cope with some of my environment. My mother was an angel, but my home was not a safe space, so it definitely Yeah, that's so funny. I've never even made that connection before between drawing as a child and the traumatic experiences that I was around all the time.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. And it's so funny because it brings us right to now, you know?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
after going to the States, I decided I wanted to be an art professor. This was after a pretty great startup career as an animator. I got to work in 3D architectural animation at Create 3D Limited. I went on to work in broadcast 3D at TV6. And then, I decided I wanted to be an art professor. I wanted to work with young people, especially in college, and help shape the future that way. You know, so to me, art was a powerful tool to influence the thoughts and ideas and beliefs that were in our community. And as a social, well, not a social, as a volunteer youth advocate, youth leader at the point in time, I think I was 19 years old. My observations being an activist at that age was that beliefs controlled almost everything. So like the more that we could influence beliefs, and I when you look into art history, art plays a huge role in how communities' beliefs change. Yeah. So so I saw it as a very powerful role being an art professor. I pursued this um in the States. I went to Stevenson University, as well as Baltimore City Community College, which is where I met three of my favorite professors, Professor Nicole Fall, who I hope will get to watch this in post, and Sandra Para, who is an amazing professor who had a huge influence on me, both on how I saw myself as a feminist artist, as well as how I saw myself my role as a feminist artist in the community, because women artists very often are overlooked, particularly if you do go to college and you learn how to paint and you understand that there's no such thing as a female master. When you study the masters, there's no woman master.
Oh, wow.
All of the masters are men. So you're talking about like Da Vinci, Michelangelo, etc., etc. There are no women in there. So like you do have contemporary contemporary artists, or like they have like all of these other ways that they refer to women artists, or who made a mark, but it's never master, right? So looking into that identity, and then of course I went into a lot of digital work. I became a marketing director at Siegel Group, another company that gave me a lot of huge opportunities to learn and get into digital marketing, etc., etc. But something very traumatic happened in 2011, which is what brought me back here to Trinidad and Tobago. Someone I was very close to, who I lived with, his name was Michael Jones. Michael Jones committed suicide on September 24th at 1 a.m. in 2011. I was the person who discovered him. Wow. And it at that moment, and all of those things I was just talking about, you're a young person, you're visualizing, what you're going to do in the world, you're working towards that. And this event took place and it shook me to my core entirely. It was just, mental health was just not something I ever thought about. I didn't think about my own mental health, far less for anybody else's, So I did understand the concept of depression, but up until that point, I don't think I had ever considered myself depressed. Maybe after a breakup. Like you have like,
because that's a traditional kind of description, or right.
Yeah, it's like, I'm sad, my breakup, but then you're kind of like, you move on to the next relationship and you're like, okay, you pursue happiness with another person, right? But I'd never considered myself a person who had chronic depression or chronic anxiety. I'd never processed either of those words up until being 26 years old as an adult. So 26 years old, Michael's suicide takes place, and all of a sudden I'm thinking, is this is a thing? Like, people are killing themselves. People of us in so much despair. And I lived with this person. And I think that oftentimes is one of the biggest points of guilt, or the
Right.
biggest points of responsibility is you live with them, so you feel like you should have seen it, like you should have caught that somehow, especially people. I would like to think like you and me, and some of these other amazing women in the audience. Thanks for being here. Women tend to see ourselves as insightful, we're connected, we're nurturing.
Empathetic. Exactly.
Yeah. So how do we miss someone that we love, that we have a relationship with? We were no longer in a romantic relationship, but we had one in the past. So I knew him very intimately and I missed it completely. So it was the trajectory. It took me off of being an art professor into a trajectory into mental health work, right?
Yeah.
Because you saw your very first time you search suicide, the first thing that pops up is every 40 seconds. Every 40 seconds on planet Earth, somebody kills themselves. Somebody is lost to suicide, which is really the better way to say that, And the idea of that is so shocking. It is. I mean, during the period of this podcast, we can count up the number of minutes, and
Right.
see.
And how many people will
It's
be lost, as you say. Yeah.
We're talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, but there's a different kind of epidemic going on that has been going on for a very long time. So
absolutely. And I think it's particularly relevant and resonant in the artistic community because not only are artists tend to be very emotive, very passionate, they feel things very deeply, and of course they've been hit very, very hard by the pandemic, and so they are at risk in a way that should alarm us all, right? And that should alarm society. And we, so for Caribbean in Transit, we have a call that we've just recently put out, called Dis-Ease, the Status of the Artist. And it's such a pertinent theme. And I think, it's very relevant to this conversation. But yes.
Very much so. And I think it is worthwhile. And I know a lot of people shy away from this issue, but we do need to talk about the issue of substance abuse within the artistic community. It is maybe a very accepted part of being an artist, or being within that community, having friends who might have, certain weaknesses or certain indulgences, and that also is part of how they explore their darkness. It's also
right. I was about to say, it's this exploration, right? This curiosity that takes them into different veins, right?
Yeah, I knew some fantastic painters in Baltimore who felt that substances were part of how they were great. So it was, they weren't constant with it. I do think if you learn how to blend the two, I'm not endorsing substance abuse, guys, but within the artistic community, it is very prevalent, and substance abuse combined with financial distress, which is, as you know, with a project that we're doing, the International Women's Day Caribbean Tech Summit, we're looking to introduce methods and learning that will help people feel more financially empowered, right? But financial distress is one of the main causes of suicide. It is something that is definitely happening in the artistic community for a very long time.
It's happening in South Africa. It's happening around the world. It's not
around the world.
We're not unique in this regard. Yeah,
exactly. So you have, and what I love about what you just said is that if we can start thinking about suicide the way that we might think about cancer, right? And suicide is preventable, right? It is
a disease. It is a disease on a certain level, right? It's a plaguing of the mind in that sense, but it's triggered,
Yeah. One of the most powerful quotes that I've ever heard to explain how suicide happens is that suicide takes place when pain exceeds resources for coping with pain, right? So if you don't have enough coping resources, then whatever pain you're experiencing, you're going to feel the need to mitigate it. You're going to need to you want to feel relief. And when a person can't feel that relief, they will try anything. And we've all been there. You will do anything to make it stop. Yeah. So after this trajectory into mental health, came back to Trinidad and Tobago to, you know, something had taken place with my mother medically. And I became very aware of the fact that if my mother had died, I would not have seen her. And that just rocked me. So I gave my notice at my job, which was a very alarming notice because I loved my job at Siegel Group. Yeah, and within 2 weeks, I was on a plane. I came back home. And since then, I actually didn't continue drawing after college. I think that's something I mentioned to you before. And I think it has a lot to do with Michael's death. Sometimes the trauma and the PTSD that I picked up from that experience, it disrupted me from connecting that emotional
with your deepest self. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, the source, it's a source that I was always connected to. You know, it extends from the body into the pencil, into the charcoal, into the brush, and onto the canvas or whatever canvas material you're using. And for me, the PTSD disrupted that entirely up until my cancer diagnosis.
I really understand that on a personal level, because I've had a similar relationship with art where it allows me to connect with my deepest self. Yes. But when I've had traumatic experiences, and I've had my own very traumatic experiences, you know, in a sense, picking up that brush again,
it's hard.
Picking up a depth that you are almost afraid to enter into. There's this I don't know, there's this blockage, right? Because you feel as though if you're allowed to feel this pain in a more, you know, in a more profound way,
you might not survive. Yeah, you might not survive.
right. So it's like it's both the healing mechanism, but it's also, I don't know, something else, right? It's a strange thing.
Know, we have so many films that have depicted the darkness of the artist. Yeah.
Right.
And in that dark space, whether it is music, whether it is painting, or whatever it is, there is all-consuming nature to it. Absolutely. That you have to surrender to it and allow it to flow through you, right?
It's something much larger than yourself, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I also feel the best way I could describe it for those people who have not experienced that as an artist is, you know, like when you sprain your ankle, but like it's tender and you don't want to, you can't walk on it, but every time you touch that foot to the ground, the pain goes right up your body. Through you,
right? So it's almost like an opening up, right? It's almost like tenderness. When you eat a different kind of pepper, like the Thai pepper, that it just is like it like illumines your whole world in a strange way.
But then you're gonna be a little bit more calculated when you eat that pepper, right? So I do think, so say for example, I think that's why I really tend towards life drawing. I think life drawing for me is very healing because it's also, it locks me into the source. I feel my observation of people feels almost like poetry to me. Sometimes I had a really great history teacher, Maria Nunes, who's actually an amazing artist herself. And she once told us, she doesn't remember telling us this, but she once told us that you know you're an artist if you are always creating art in your mind, right? So and I noticed that when I came back home, you know, my mother's house, her family home is in East Dry River. They were one of the first Chinese families to be up here. So we'll have a lot of ancestry here. But here in the East Port of Spain community, there's so much beauty, there's so much culture, there's so much life. I would be in a taxi coming up Laventille Road and I'm drawing in my mind. So, but remember, not actually doing anything for
Yes,
almost
but
9 years.
I think that answers so many questions, even for me, right? You know, sometimes you question yourself, okay, if you're not actually doing art, are you still an artist, right? I mean, you know, on one hand, you know you are, but on the other hand, it's so distant from you at points in your life.
Yes.
But yes, I'm always creating art in my mind. I'm always thinking of the next project. And, you know, but I just want to toggle back as well to, you know, this whole question of substance abuse, because I think that is such a pertinent issue. And it makes me think of an artist in Haiti who I once interviewed extensively. His name is Mario Benjamin, internationally known artist, middle-class artist who, you know, kind of intervene in the spaces of the you know, what we call the neighborhood arts projects, right? Like the Grand Rue project, and, you know, and there's so many neighborhood enclaves of artists in Haiti. And he talks about that at length. You know, he has a book that was written on him called The Room of Mario Benjamin. And his works are dark and so poignant, right? And but he talks about that struggle with mental health and with substance abuse, but what that does for his art, right?
Yeah, it's hard.
He was in a family, you know, he came from a middle to upper class background where they could support, they could help him, they could provide for him. But if you're an artist who does not have, as you say, those resources, whatever those, you know, financial and other resources, the effects are detrimental. And so that whole question of, you know, poverty reduction and socioeconomic empowerment, the artistic class is very much oftentimes within that bracket. And we, you know, we are at risk in many ways. And we need, you know, those social security supports need to be put in place for this, you know, for this aspect of society that has so much potential to change belief systems, to contribute positively, because it's almost as though it's because they're feeling it so deeply that they are reacting to this thing that is just too much pressure. So anyway, I just wanted to interrupt with that a little bit.
No, but I definitely think, and I just want to be open here, and I've been open about it. I've struggled with my own substance abuse issues, my own alcoholism as a young person. Coming back to Trinidad, I think I was exposed to the rampant substance abuse within my demographic. So it was very normalized. It's normalized in Trinidad and Tobago now. I dare anybody to challenge me on that. I think substance abuse is extremely normalized as a coping mechanism for what you might describe as some of the static natures of our social systems, our class culture, our you know, classism that we have here. People are struggling to move forward because they have glass ceilings on top of them. So you have extremely talented, you know, powerful artists, designers, you know, painters, but also professionals who are techpreneurs, who are lawyers. I mean, you name it, I've seen them in the thick of it. You know what I mean? And the reality behind that is not that it's sad. The reality behind that is that we don't prioritize healing as a modern community, right? And when I say modern, I'm talking about like the industrial community. We don't prioritize healing. So you know what we do? We do prioritize treatment from the perspective of instantaneous relief, right? So you know, take an Advil or drink some Pepto-Bismol if you have inflammation. You know what I mean? Like, so to me, drugs are a type of self-medication, which is why they call it that. People are medicating themselves because they don't have pathways that they've been taught that are healthier, that are fuller. They also haven't been taught how to prioritize their relationships. So, I mean, even quite a lot of people in my family will tell you, and of course my close friends will tell you that I am struggling to learn how to have, I was struggling. I do think I'm in a better place now. But when you start healing, you realize that you have to heal your relationships too, because they are your emotional environment. It may not be tangible, but your relationships, your emotional connections with other people are as real as the walls in this house, right? So when artists are taught more to react. You know, something happens, so we react to it. We don't think about resiliency. Granted, I do think we have more of a trend of a holistic artist kind of coming out, you know, people who are like a little bit more zen and a little bit more into it. I mean, I do think there's a trend about that, but I do think the dark art, when I say dark, I mean, you know what I mean. Like, you know, the art, when you look at it, it haunts you because it spoke to you, like that art just reached inside of you and pulled something out. Those artists I find on a mental health level, I do worry about them. I'm like, are you okay? Like, you see this
No,
art,
I think that's real, because I think art is often reflective of your inner journey, right? Reflective of your inner scape. And so when that dark art does come out, I mean, in one sense, you're glad that it comes out because maybe they are externalizing it and not just keeping it all in. But at the same time, it then reflects something that is happening that maybe needs to be addressed in some way, right? And that maybe it cannot be fully addressed through the art alone because it has been constructed, it has been developed through multiple forces impressing themselves upon the artist, right? Or upon the, you know, the individual. And so art can be a means to express, art can be a means to heal, but there are other factors, there are other support that are needed in this framework, right?
So, I mean, getting into the last part of my artistic journey, which is the Views from the Waiting Room series, and of course the work that I'm doing at Fitzroy Hoyt's studio. I haven't been there for a little bit because of some recent treatment that I've had to do, but I do plan on going back soon. I do feel that, as you know, that work for me, life drawing, is freeing, but it also opens up to me that is my medium. I don't know if that clicks for every artist when you discover, okay, this is it for me. Like, and I actually experimented with a few different things in Fitzroy's studio where I was kind of like, maybe this is a different direction I want to try. I want to feel free to try different things. But yeah, it's pen and marker for me. Like, for me, like the moment I touch that marker to the page, like something else happens. It is a magical experience every time, and I can always feel it. It's like you are like an electrical cord and the electricity is flowing through you, you know, in the way. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No. I mean, I just love that you're talking about this, and it connects to, I mean, again, this is why, you know, this is, I guess, in a sense, the channel that I connected with you through, because when I saw your work, it really just touched something inside of me, right? That was kind of submerged. And, you know, funnily enough, I did art at A levels, and that's all I ever wanted to do, mind you.
Yeah,
you know,
me too.
But unfortunately, I didn't get to go study it. But you know, that's a conversation for another time.
Oh, you would have loved.
Oh God, girl, I know. I'm forever saying I'm going to go back.
You would have been like, yeah, the art school.
I would have been beside myself. But I also loved life drawing. And I did a lot of self-portraits. So I wondered as well, you know, do you do self-portraits? So it really connected. The work really connected and spoke to me on that level, because I also love to do that kind of work. And for me, you know, we're talking about mental health and healing. That really was a source of stability and stabilization for me. And, you know, that's why I do the social entrepreneurship work that I do. And I think that is why we connected so deeply, because it was like, oh my God, it's like I'm seeing like another form of me almost, you know.
Yes, that was a pretty amazing first conversation we had. And you know, and I also feel, and I look back into, one thing I think I miss the most about being in the US is the volume of art magazines that are available. I love art curation. I think that it's a lost art, particularly in certain communities, especially here in the Caribbean. We don't have enough art curators, people who are documenting what is going on, like what you're doing, you know, like there is a need for more art curation, telling these stories. But what I guess what I'm getting at is there's so many ways for, and getting into the career aspect of it now, right? So for me as a fine artist, I'm now trying to figure out how does this go from an expression to a career, right? Or how does this go from me processing and creating into something that could bring me financial wellness? And people tell you all the time, people tell you things like you should be making money off your art, and people think that, oh no, it doesn't click like that for me. I don't know about other artists, but for me, yeah, it was.
I think that there are two things here, right? As a social entrepreneur, when you've been thinking like a social entrepreneur for a long time, there's a switch to be made, right? Because you have used art in terms of the value of your art as a healing mechanism, as a healing tool, and not as a financial wellness tool, as you put it, which I love that term. I think that should be a new term that we use. And there's a system and there's a structure to developing the business side of art. And some people are also gifted with that capacity to understand and to exist and to develop that business side of things. But that's not everybody. Some persons they're artists, but they've come from families that do business on some level, so that they, there's that side of them that's being developed simultaneously while they're pursuing their art. And so when they then manifest at a certain level as an adult artist, you're like, oh, how come they got that side? It was constructed, it was nurtured, you know what I mean? So don't feel any way about that. But
I see my sisters in the room. Hi, Alice. I would tell you all of my siblings are business minded except for me. I am the one who doesn't understand money. Like, I could be making money, but I don't understand money, so it is something that I think it helps when you do have like the need to do business. I've been very lucky, and I know that I'm lucky because I know other people who are struggling in jobs where they don't get to be creative. But I've been lucky where every job that I had, I was given a lot of creative freedom, which means, and I was given opportunities to learn new skills. So, and to work with, I suppose, my own version of masters, like people who are the top of their game, who were doing unique and interesting things.
That's a huge blessing, Maria. That's a huge blessing, because not everybody's work experience is that positive and that fruitful and that nurturing. So I think that you have been really, really blessed in that regard. And I mean, the business coaching in terms of developing your business, the business aspect of your art, that can come on. You're fully capable of doing that. So I have no fears for you there. I'd love to talk about some of the work that you're doing to support other entrepreneurs, other techpreneurs.
Yeah.
We've been talking about one side of you, Maria, but I know that there are just, myriad facets to be explored. And so I want to explore some of those facets with you in terms of the work that you're doing with IWD, the work that you're doing with animation. You wear a number of hats. So tell us a little bit more about the design change, the MindWise project, and all of these things that you're doing.
Sure thing. So before I start shamelessly plugging things,
you can shamelessly plug here. We're all for it.
So firstly, design change was really, as I mentioned in my bio, I consider myself a lifelong volunteer, because it's anytime someone needed something digitally and I could do it, I just did it, and it was, whether it was digital or physical. So I kind of consider myself a digital activist. I'm kind of coining that term. So it's like, so as a digital activist, I've done a lot of work helping of too long to count number of organizations, which sometimes it could be a website, it could be a poster. I was a UN online volunteer for several years, helping UN agencies across the world with design projects, as well as web projects. Sometimes, any sort of design assistance that I could offer. So when I came back to Trinidad, and with all of my skills, I tried for 1 or 2 years working with some of the more toxic structures that I've encountered in the media industry, not calling out any names here. And you won't find them on my LinkedIn either. So don't bother to go looking.
Not looking.
But it is, there were some really toxic structures that made me think maybe it's better for me to try doing a consultancy. And because of the high note that I entered Trinidad and Tobago on, with the work that I had done in the US, getting clients wasn't difficult. The problem I think came up with, I wasn't really interested in what a person might coin as corporate work. I was really interested in helping people who were struggling to get their businesses off the ground. I wanted to help people. And of course, that's not a good business model. Like, you want to have clients who have money, right? But I was really drawn, and you observe yourself, the jobs that I put the most love into were the jobs that I was making the least money on, right?
And so this is the social entrepreneurship side, right?
Exactly. Yes. So really looking at, I wanted to continue to do that all the time. So I named the consultancy Design Change. So technically Design Change has been around since about 2013. But it only recently we've really started to center in what is the goal of Design Change? Because at that point in time, we're just trying to help various nonprofits or startups with anything that they want, that they need at the moment, at what they could afford. So I mean, I'm pretty sure my mom and myself sometimes would have conversations about things that we would help somebody for like 3 months. So like we would help them for 3 months, and then next thing you know, it's 2 years, and then we really are like, hey guys, we're gonna try and help you figure out how to do this yourself, right? So I would say from helping organizations on that level, I really became aware of what startups needed, what a budding entrepreneur needed, and how to empower them to do things on their own. I wasn't really interested in locking people in a long-term relationship with myself or my company. I really wanted to just be like, hey, these are ways and systems for you to accomplish this. And I think if they need to come to you for everything, then you haven't given them a good system, right?
Well, that's what I call number one, good leadership.
Yeah.
So that's, but also number two, it's a kind of succession planning, right? It's developing the sustainability of entrepreneurs and young entrepreneurs. And that's what your social entrepreneurship enterprise is about, right? Developing sustainability for others. And also developing succession planning, because I think it's one of the things that we don't often do very well in the Caribbean, in the region. We don't put a succession plan in place because there's this fear of letting go of power. There's this fear of evolving and transforming.
I love that you brought that up, because so even say, for example, shameless plug, right now we're planning International Women's Day Caribbean Tech Summit 2022. You can check us out at iwdtechsummit.com. We, as the Google Women Tech Makers ambassadors who are behind it right now, it's about 5 of us. Last year I chaired the first event, and I think this year I'm chairing it again, but with the goal, I'm sure we've already started talking about this, with the goal of I would not like to chair it next year. Next year I think it should be another ambassador or another partner, whoever steps up to take that role, right? And I think I'm having a same approach even with Mindwise Project. Mindwise Project is a mental health nonprofit that I co-founded with Stacey Camacho and Rhonda Chansu, and our board of directors includes Elise Marcella and Arnaldo James, who is also now founding director. And the work that we do is in mental health innovation, trying to disrupt this space in the Caribbean with digital solutions that help people right now. Like, we don't just want to like build something that might help people later. Like, we are really interested in building things that help people who are looking for relief, looking for treatment, looking for advice in any mental health situation. And we have quite a few dire mental health situations taking place here in the Caribbean. Guyana, for example, has one of the highest rates of suicide in the world. Trinidad and Tobago has the 3rd highest rate of suicide in the Caribbean. So it's just one of those things where you start processing, not to mention the gender-based violence aspect of what's happening in the Caribbean, but we're not going to get into that because that's like a whole other podcast. But I do think that bridging what was happening with Design Change with what Mindwise got launched, and we start getting into that type of work, the conversations that were coming out of coming into my sphere of influence, right? It was exciting, but it was also humbling, because it felt like a path was unfolding in front of me as to what my purpose was, right?
Let's talk about that purpose a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I feel as though your purpose is on so many levels, and it's really honestly fascinating to me.
So like what, I mean, like the text summit, I mean, just look at the conversation that we had last Sunday. That Sunday blew my mind. I messaged, I was like, hey, these conversations are getting really good. We should start recording them. But like, it really is a place where I see myself as someone who nurtures and connects. If you look at an innovation space, I suppose you might consider me a connector. But only recently in the last few years have I started to see myself as a creator, right? A manifester of sorts. So, and some of this has been coming to me very organically. I'm noticing that the more that I am being brave with my ideas, I seem to be having this amazing divine scheduling that is happening, where when I choose to be brave, it is happening with the perfect person to help that brave moment materialize into something, right? And that is, I honestly believe this, that anybody could do this. I think that it is something that I have learned both as I've started to heal with my cancer. I do believe in the more that you believe is the more that it will happen. If you can treat your anxiety, I do recommend mental health treatment. I do recommend serious mental health professionals if you have chronic anxiety disorder, which is something that I have. And because it doesn't always manifest the same way. Like, a person who has an anxiety issue isn't necessarily someone hiding in a corner, like a person who has an anxiety issue could be a very outspoken individual who likes to drink a lot. And where do you think that drinking comes from? They're taming their anxiety. If they have an issue with cocaine, for example, Robin Williams had an issue with cocaine, and when he did an interview about it, his interview, in that interview, he said it's because he used to be so nervous when he was out in Hollywood around all of these people who wanted him to be a certain way. So the drugs helped him get there.
Yeah,
You know what
coping
I mean?
mechanisms. Yeah.
So I mean, so for me, I think that purpose that I'm leaning into is to co-create, find people to co-create with, but also in particular with my mental health work, and in particular the diversity and inclusion work. I see the diversity, equity, and inclusion work to be something that's really important here in the Caribbean, and understanding what that means for our Caribbean peoples, not necessarily looking at what diversity, equity, and inclusion means for other countries. What does it mean for us? Because I think that's something that we have to figure out. So persons like you, I mean, I'm throwing that out to you in front of everybody. I've asked a few other women leaders, and I'm probably going to ask one or two people in this room right now to join us on the journey of discovering what that actually means. Because I do think the concept of diversity and inclusion is something that's been brought down on a plane, if you know what I mean. So it's kind of like we're inheriting it from the United States and the UK and maybe Europe, right? But we can't just expect that to penetrate Caribbean culture when it's not being built for our Caribbean scenarios and things that we're dealing with in the workplace. We've seen some crazy stories, just in that little WhatsApp exchange that we had between some of our fellow partners, talking about how they deal with it in the workplace, and our Caribbean workplaces are very different from American workplaces or workplaces in the UK, and we need to start treating our problems in the workplace differently.
So sometimes when I talk to you, I feel as though I'm talking to myself, Maria, because like I
You do
literally
have those moments.
the same thing that you're saying. I've heard myself saying, and I've been on a few interviews, for example, over here with American companies, and they talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it looks very different in the US to how it looks in the Caribbean. And as an immigrant trying to kind of balance and understand the two spaces simultaneously, because you're never totally in one, you're always kind of juggling between the two, it becomes a very complex scenario to understand the different models, understand what those different models might look like, and how you translate between them on a consistent basis as well, because we operate as global Caribbean citizens in many ways. So there are all those levels, but I also wanted to just highlight, what you're talking about in terms of co-creation. I mean, collaboration has been my middle name for a long time, particularly with women too. I found myself always working with women. And
same. Well, recently, yes.
Yeah. Same. And it's been a trend that I've kind of like, oh, this is just kind of what I do. And it's not that I don't work with men, it's just that it's 95 to 97% women. So there's that. And I think that synergy and support is not something that we should take for granted. I mean, through my Synapse coaching, one of the things that I'm doing and working on is creating this what I call a She Accelerate tribe, because that support is critical to our growth. It is critical to the models, to the learning, and to the legacy that we pass down to another generation so that they don't have to deal with the same problems that we have had to face.
That's a big part of it for me too.
Yes. I mean, I think the work that you're doing is just so phenomenal. And, the mentorship that you're giving to so many young people, the inspiration that you are to so many women, and the work that you're doing in terms of putting the region and technology in the region on a global scale on a global stage through women tech makers. And that is no small accomplishment. So, tell us, feel free to brag about, the women tech makers and what you're doing with International Women's Day.
Sure. So our tech summit, and the reason why we didn't brand it as a Google Women Tech Makers Summit. We branded it as a Caribbean Tech Summit because we wanted there to be a home for diversity and inclusion work with Google. Was this aggressively growing industry, aggressively growing path for advancement. And what I loved about becoming a Women Tech Makers Ambassador was that 80% of what we were required to do was training. It wasn't necessarily these events. Like these events were like things like, hey, you can host one of these events, But the reality was that 80% of it is training in diversity and inclusion. So learning those things and then understanding, we don't really have a home for these conversations regionally. I would like to say the legacy of International Women's Day combined with regional diversity and inclusion work seemed to be perfect to me. So when the opportunity came from Google developer groups for us to not just do individual, before last year, we would just do country events. So it would be Trinidad and Tobago's event. But Google developer groups decided that they wanted us to work within our areas, our zones.
Right.
And we normally get grouped in with LATAM. And I love my LATAM folks. I've presented at Google LATAM more than once. And it was a very exciting experience. Fortunately, I know a little bit of Spanish, so it wasn't too embarrassing, but it was, we as a Caribbean, we have a very different identity than LATAM. And so sometimes it's always interesting to me when you see people putting your geographic regions, Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'm just saying, like, those are two completely different experiences. Completely different experiences. We deal with different issues. We have completely different cultural segments and realities, right? That need to be addressed separately. So I was very, very fortunate to be given a lot of opportunities to connect. So like last year, bringing together the partners that came together, I was very, very honored for them to be with us in that space. We had people like Caribbean Girls Hack, Nicole Peter Patterson. We had Camille Selvon from Anime Carib, which I'm also on the committee, the management team for Anime Carib as their creative director. I feel, and I've been working with Anime Carib as a volunteer for 3 or 4 years before being like, okay, let's make this official. Clearly, I don't see myself leaving this team. I believe in Anime Carib and what Camille Selvon is doing so much. So like there really is, it really was a powerful partnership. Granted, I don't think we really knew how. It was such an organic gathering of women leaders that we were just kind of like, what's the goal? Let's just deliver what we intend to. But then after the event was over, the work, the partnerships, the connections continued.
Right.
So we started to support each other's projects. So like people like Anushka Sanai and Nicole Peter Patterson worked together on their Girls in ICT intervention last year. Anushka Sanai, by the way, for those of you who don't know, she manages Caribbean Tech Hub from Suriname. She's also a rock star of a tech leader that, she was just here with us. But she definitely is also a nurturer of ecosystems. And I described you the same. I do see certain people as ecosystem creators.
Right.
And Camille Selvon is another one. She's creating an ecosystem. And if you do that, it's kind of like, I don't want to say divine, because you're not God, but it almost is a godlike power that we as humans have.
I think that we consider it our purpose and a divine purpose that we have been given to, do this work, right? So I don't divorce from that whatsoever.
Exactly, to have the ability to do it. It is a gift. And there's a reason why they call these things gifts, because it comes from somewhere, the ability to do this, right? It's not like it grew on us like a finger or, your hair. This is something that we are given a unique position of influence to do, and to not take the advantage. If I notice that if I speak up in a room, everybody listens to me, but somebody else, everyone might ignore. I notice that I'm in a position of influence and power to change things, to influence other people who are in a position of authority, a position of decision making. The kind of rooms and meetings that I have been in, extraordinarily humbled by all of it, but I feel great responsibility. There's no way I'm going to be in a boardroom meeting, a virtual meeting, a conference that I've been invited to, where I'm surrounded by world leaders and I don't say something. I always speak up. If there's an open forum, Maria's going to be opening her mouth. Be ready. And even if there isn't an open forum, people will tell you that I will, during the lunch break, I will pull up a chair to the Prime Minister St. Vincent's table, where he always has the best table. So like, because he's so friendly and he's so entertaining, like people just gravitate towards him. So like, and I say, hey, there's a group of us young leaders over there, and we would love for you to join our table. And they came. So like very often I find that you discover your power, your superpower, right? And
your Shiro gift.
My Shiro gift. And my Shiro gift is connecting and working with people who are decision makers. So similarly, as we were talking about succession earlier, I'm getting ready now this year for us to officialize how this Tech Summit ecosystem actually is going to work, right? Yeah. And I'm very excited by some of the potential partners coming on, because those are people that can help us do that, right? And then the next step after that for me is the officialization of the Caribbean as an entity, as a territory within the tech space. And not LATAM and the Caribbean, you know what I mean? Or like, I honestly,
to have to maintain our individual identity and have that cultural confidence to stand on our own and to say, this is who we are, and we are organized and we are systematic, and we are going to, we're going to speak our part. Yes, agreed.
So like a perfect example is, I was very, very lucky this year to be featured on Google's keyword blog. And when you look at the tags in it, it says diversity and inclusion developer. But I was like, I've actually made an email request for them to add the tag Caribbean, because there should be a Caribbean tag. And because, you know, to me, it's just one of those things where I'm like, even that, if I were to accomplish that this year and get them to add a Caribbean tag,
that would be a huge accomplishment. Yeah.
Because we have several Caribbean Googlers who have been featured on Google's keyword blog. Perfect example is Katie Singh. Katie Singh is one of the leads for Google Maps. And she's working on climate control, climate change solutions, features that are being rolled out in Google Maps all around the world. You guys who are in the United States would have access to it. I don't think we have access to it here in Trinidad and Tobago yet. And she's been featured in more than one article about that.
Right.
And you're just kind of like, there's no Caribbean tag on it. And I think it's important to tag people from the countries that they come from, or from the
region, at least
the regions that they come from, because this isn't just Google's story. And that is also another
I think
type of activism.
This is right. And this is, well, you called it digital activism before, right? And I think it really goes back as well to this whole question of the metaverse and cultural identity within the metaverse, and how do we, not lose ourselves in that space. And right. So that
hot topic of the year. And right. I keep telling people, I was like, guys, I'm a geek. And I still haven't wrapped my head around it yet. Like,
right. I think it's going to take some time, right? But I think that this co-creation is an important foundation for wrapping your head around it. And I think the Tech Summit is going to help us to do that even more. So I'm really excited. So we are just 3 minutes before the end of our hour. Can you believe it, Maria, already? And
I told you, I knew this was going to happen. So.
I mean, there's so much more that we can talk about. But I wanted to help us kind of wrap it up in terms of what advice you would give to the young creative entrepreneur. What advice would you give to the young painter, dancer, or mother whose child has a creative talent?
Ooh, that's heavy. I think the number one thing is to find a mentor. If for the young ones or the budding artists, I was very privileged to have a lot of creative mentors in my life, both in art school and outside of it. I had people who knew that I had a gift, who supported me as well, from a perspective of, Maria, we think you're doing so great. Why don't you do more of this, right? And I think I was always very private about my work. So I think the number one thing is be bold. Don't be so private. Don't hide your work and wait for, our theme, right? Progress, not perfection, right?
Right.
Don't look for perfect, because you could be touching people, you could be learning things by exposing yourself to more mentorship, exposing yourself to more what we might call criticism. We have a criticism sensitive culture here in the Caribbean, and I think maybe globally, probably all artists.
Well, I think it's also an issue of trust. In terms of putting your work out there and feeling as though somebody's going to steal it, or somebody, there's the critique part, but then there's the trust issue. But I would say that while, yes, that reality does exist, I think the possibility to find people who can mentor you and find people who you can synergize with by sharing your work is a more powerful and amazing potentiality than losing something. And you are the creative. I mean, you have the creativity is coming out of you. So there's going to be more, And
not just that, I think, especially if it happens when they're young, when a young person learns how to mold and wield this talent bravely, right? Then just imagine that's limitless, You don't even have to put a path. Like, their path is like going everywhere, because then they realize that they are the creator of their reality as an artist. And so I think that's the number one takeaway for me, with my recent experience with views from the waiting room, which isn't like, trending on Instagram or anything, but I definitely feel it is more attention than I have ever been shown on my art before. Like, I've never put my art out there the way that I have. And I was doing these drawings for a few weeks before I started sharing it. And when I shared the first one, there was so much reaction to it. And I don't just mean like likes and that kind of stuff. I mean, I had
personal reaction.
People who were my
Right.
artistic mentors reaching out to me, being like, we always knew that you could do this kind of work, but it's amazing that you're now starting to do it. Because before it was always art assignments. And they had seen my ability to deliver an art assignment, but now they were watching me do what they always knew that I could do. And all of this was happening in a waiting room in a hospital. So it was really like this,
the unexpected place, right?
Yeah, this unexpected place where you might expect to be, your darkest self, your least empowered. I felt the most creative energy flowing through me than I had ever felt in over a decade. So getting back to the advice, be bold, be brave, don't hide. There are tons of online communities for artists that are safe for you to share your work, for you to find mentors. There's also a lot of mentorship platforms that I don't know if there's fine art in there, but we know we're not just talking about fine artists, we're talking about digital artists.
Right. And well, we're creating that kind of platform at the Meeting Place community as well. So feel free to jump on to the Meeting Place community, and we are building that out. And so, I mean, Marie, I think we may have to have a part 2, because it's such an inspiration. And I feel that people need to know and understand more about the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
And also opportunities to support the work that you're doing, because I think if it is supported, it's going to go even further, and it's going to have so many ripple effects across our nation and for our region in terms of the global work that you're doing. So I can't say thank you enough. I can't say thank you enough.
I can't say thank you enough too. Meeting you has been very special to me, and just another universal agreement that I'm on the right path here. So very honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And this has been the Synapse podcast. This is our 5th episode. You can download the Meeting Place community app to get all the recordings of our program. Again, this has been our episode with Miss Maria O'Brien. She is an artist. She is a tech maker. She is a social entrepreneur, and just all around an amazing, incredible human being. So thank you again.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.